Today, we are meeting someone who has served in the Royal Air Force as a pilot for 18 years, is a sports legend, championing the game for over 14 years, and a celebrated businessman who has been helping businesses for the last 25 years, right? Don't get mistaken, we're not talking about three different people, but just one, Rory. Rory Underwood, welcome to the In Conversation show.
Thank you, Mansoor. It's really, honoured to be here, especially your first guest.
Fantastic. Thank you for taking out time. Rory, first of all, I'm very curious and interested to know that how can one be so successful in diverse and different domains, right? So you have been, you've served in the Air Force, so that's the military background, and then with sports, right? So rugby legend, certainly. And then finally, with your consultancy work that you're doing in the area of business. So how can one be so successful in multiple domains? How did you do it?
Oh, that's a very full question, isn't it? So, it's like anybody who gets on in life and works. I come from a generation where I played sport. Like there's lots of people that play sport of whatever description as a hobby, as a pastime, either during the week or on weekends. And so for me, I played rugby at my school I went to, which is Barnard Castle School, and that's where I learned how to play rugby. And that followed on through to playing for Middlesbrough Rugby Club when I was 16. And so the sort of leaving school and going on into work, I did school, I played rugby, then I went to work and joined the Royal Air Force, which is my occupation, and the sport continued. So it's like any other scenario. Now, as to why I'm good at both, that's lucky, mum and dad, the genes were passed down, thank you.
Indeed.
So that obviously helped. Fortunate, I went to, my parents, they met in Malaysia, grew up there. I had to go to boarding school. They wanted me to go to boarding school. Mm-hmm. So I came back to the UK, and one of the closest schools to where my grandparents were living in North Ormsby was Barnard Castle School. So I ended up going to a school that played rugby, and I'd never known anything about rugby before, so I only started playing at 11. So there's a bit of fortune there. And I've always been quick, my mother's genes, especially on my mother's side, she was a bit of an athlete when she was at school. And so I've always been quick and getting put into that rugby environment and starting playing. And I've always been into sport, love sport. My brother and I used to play one-on-one football all evening until mum would scream at us and get back in the house and have tea, whatever. That was the way that was in having those two things side by side. When I finished the Air Force, obviously I had to take on another occupation, and I went into business following my experiences from both the Air Force and playing sport. Also, the catalyst of this all was I'd been asked to do various speaking engagements and doing keynote speaking, etc. And I did a 3-year ground tour in the Royal Air Force, which was looking at crew resource management, which is basically human factors. Mm-hmm. So that human factors element really was a catalyst for me looking at taking it on to the next level with regards to consultancy. How can I help teams? How can I help businesses? And so that was the link in coming out of the military and going into the civilian world. And so using my expertise, my knowledge, my experience, my lessons I've learned, all that, stuff that we get stuck away in our brains somewhere, I use that to help me start a business and go into business and try and create a package and a proposition that was suitable, understandable, and trying to be successful in trying to build a business based on those experiences. So the 3 haven't been done at the same time, albeit 2 were. But the 2 that I started with the Air Force and the rugby, obviously paved the way for me to go into business. And, it's one of my sort of tenets always been there's pros and cons to everything. Being somebody that's recognised and is known is definitely a pro because you get indoors and whatever, but you still got to prove that you're have the ability to be able to deliver, etc., and show results. And so sometimes it can be a con because people sort of assume certain things, just assume you're going to be a motivational speaker and that's it. And just do performance from a sporting perspective, of which obviously I'm not. I'm in the business area. And so there's always pros and cons from that point of view. But, you know, I suppose you need a psychologist, you need a performance, you know, expert and all that sort of stuff to pick out all the bits and pieces why people like us have some success and are able to carry it on and through. But it's not been plain sailing. It's not been sort of bang, it happens, success. I mean, I've been doing it for 25 years and I haven't made millions yet. So there's still a long way to go. But I'm enjoying doing it at the moment.
Great. That's so interesting, Rory. And they say that, you know, your profession and passion should be the same. I mean, ideally speaking. Right?
Yep.
So I know that when you served as a pilot in the Royal Air Force, that's the day job, right? And then in the evening you started this as a hobby, playing rugby, right? So do you believe in this notion of passion and profession? Can they be same or they can be different on different tangents, and at the same time you can carry them together for long? I mean, you have successfully done it, but
yeah.
What do you think?
Well, for me, I suppose my passion was to fly. And when I was going backwards and forwards between Malaysia and the UK when I went back on holiday, that's what sparked my interest in flying. And then went to school, joined the CCF, the Combined Cadet Force, joined the Air Force section, went to camps, went flying, and that's drew me in. And so my occupation was flying jets. And so, you know, a passion of flying and doing that occupation was one and the same. The rugby, it wasn't so much a profession because obviously it wasn't a professional game in those days. But all those lessons I've learned and going into the business I'm doing now, you know, business is, as anybody knows, you know, running a small business is hard work. It's, you know, you've got to constantly be on it, thinking about it and thinking the next thing. I've got a small team of people that work for me and I know I'm responsible for them. Would I do this week in, week out if I was just good at it but didn't have the passion for it? Possibly not, you know. I suppose from my perspective, the ideal situation is to be passionate about something and it is a profession for you, and you have the two combined, it obviously makes lives so much easier. There are some people that do one or the other, but without a doubt, if you can combine the two, it does help.
Brilliant. That's a fantastic insight talking about that. So talking a bit more about the transition, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, for the last 25 years, you have been running this consultancy firm and helping businesses in terms of strategy, team building, leadership, and events, right? So, what kind of lessons can we draw from military, your career in Air Force, and is there some connection between the lessons that you've learned in military that can be applied in business? That's part A of the question. And second one is, can there be some lessons drawn from your sports background? Right. So in terms of championships and winning this and, you know, playing on the field, are there some lessons that we can apply in business from these two domains? Maybe you want to take them one by one.
Yeah. How long have we got? The first one that comes to me in the context of building teams, if you speak to anybody about sport at the highest level and ask the question about, do you think that they have to be, you know, whether it's a football team, cricket team, rugby team or whatever, do those 11, 15 people, do they need to work cohesively as a team as well as do the skill set and etc. to be able to be successful? Then the answer is yes. So, you know, I have to pass a ball, catch a ball and kick it or whatever and score tries. But also if the 15 of us actually work together as a team, we will have success as well. So it's the what you've got to do and how you do it as 15 people. And this, you know, that obviously is sport. From a military point of view, I know that when I get into my aircraft and I take it airborne, I've had a team of people servicing it, looking after it. I've got a team of people that are looking after the weather, the operation side of things, you know, runway and, you know, any problems with the navigation area and stuff like this. Then I've got all the other people that are flying the rest of the Air Force that we work together to try and fly our sorties. So there's a big, massive team behind getting one of us airborne in one aircraft at the front, but there's a whole team that gets it airborne, and I'm trusting them and relying on them to work together to A, get my aircraft ready on time to make sure it's serviceable, and I put my life in their hands to make sure when I get airborne, the aircraft is in its proper state to be. So for me, there was a big lesson with regards to what we're trying to do, as well as how we do it as groups of people in trying to achieve that success. And so going to the business world, it was one of the really big challenges I found going to the business world, where the what was more like 90% of what everybody thought about. And if they didn't succeed, there were questions asked, and invariably it was, well, they're not a very good team, or the how they worked together was the bit that they sort of was an afterthought, or at least if the team needs to have a bit of team building, well, we'll just go to the pub and have a few beers, and that should sort it all out. Whereas, you know, the amount of time and effort that we put into training in both in rugby and in the Air Force to get that, and it's not just team spirit and esprit de corps, it's also the mechanics and the dynamics of how individuals interact with each other to make them the best team possible to actually deliver what you want to do. And for me, one of the things that I learned very early on when I came into the world of business was that the Yankee dollar speaks very loudly. So when you ask people, you know, how do you measure with somebody's high performance, invariably it's going to be attached to some monetary measurement whatsoever.
Reinforcement.
Yeah, and so is that a successful team? Have they made money? Have they exceeded the money? They're a high performance team. To me, that says, yes, they've been successful from a monetary perspective, but how does that tell you whether the team have been high performance? So one of the questions that very quickly came into my mind is, your success of your team, is that because you're actually working as a team, or in spite of you working as a team, is one of the challenges I challenge businesses to think all the time. And it's an area that people find very difficult to answer that question. So, you know, measuring it from a monetary point of view, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't do it, I'm saying it's a factor, and it's what you do, yes, but so is the how. So when I came out, one of the biggest challenges I had was trying to engage with people, for them to get to understand the what is important, but so is the how.
Yeah, well said. Beautiful. Right. In terms of business domain, right? So on the note that you just mentioned about high performance, right? So I want to know from you, Rory, that is it more difficult to convert a mediocre performer to high performer, or is it more difficult to coach or mentor a high performer to fly even higher? Which one of these two is more difficult, mediocre to high or high to super high? What do you think from sports background?
Yeah,
as well
I mean,
as
it's interesting because when you've got somebody sort of in the middle of the pack, they've got so much potential, and obviously trying to unlock that is a difficulty. You could argue if you're talking to a high potential, they're obviously finding that, and the psychology of it there, or it may potentially be because they just find it easy. There are some people like that. You know, in sport we come across a lot of examples of they've got more talent in their finger than I have in my body, and yet they haven't actually used that potential. And so part of it that psychologists will talk about this and performance experts will talk about it, you know, a lot of it is the top 2 inches, the mentality of it. So there are plenty of people who've got skill and talent, but if they don't have that psychological drive, ambition, desire, resilience, etc., and there's loads of other ones you can label on there, then they'll never actually achieve what they can do. From my perspective, one of the things is for people to, when I talk about it from that perspective, it's don't expect to get a 50% improvement out of a mediocre person and a high performance person. Because if a person is, you know, operating at peak performance, you're never going to improve them 50%, because if you do, then they're not operating at peak performance.
Certainly, yeah.
So when you talk about the 100-meter world record, you know, if they knock off 0.01% second, they'll be over the moon, and it's, you know, broken the world record. If you beat it by 2 seconds, that's just never heard of.
Yeah.
So when you're at the top, you know, those runners are all within a second when they cross the line of 100 meters. That's how close it is. A hundredth of a second is massive. When you talk about somebody who's mediocre, what is, you know, the improvement there? If you think about it from a point of view of numbers of people in the business, and you take the standard mean curve, the majority of people are in the middle. And one of the things we talk about with business is you've got lots of your high performers up here, so the top 10, 15, 20% of your performers. And of course, leaders sort of stroke them, look after them, pay them lots of money because they don't want to lose them, because they you know, produce a lot of income. Then you've got this bottom 20% who are the problem makers. You just spend 80% of your time trying to manage them, sort them out, trying to get them better, all that sort of stuff. And your time is taken up by this lot. So invariably, a lot of your time is taken up by the poor performers or the really good performers. This middle 60%, which is your, you know, major part of your business, gets missed, overlooked, or whatever. And yet you could argue if you actually got 1%, 5% improvement across that 60%, actually the whole business would move.
Yeah.
So one of the things I get challenged leaders to think about is where you're spending your time with your performers.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not advocating the GE sort of bottom 10% get rid of, but there's elements of thinking if you can't spend years and years and years with the bottom performers. You've got to give them, you've got to try and get them to improve, change their role, change their tasks, give them a different job to do, whatever. But if it doesn't work, then you've got to get rid of them because you're wasting your time with that. This middle people, that's the one that have so much potential if you can increase that. Now, whether you can make them into high performers and peak performers, some of them may do. But if you could get even a small percentage across the whole 60%, then the business would massively improve.
I didn't know this. You were also a statistician at the same time, right? So with this middle percent and mean, and then 10% here, and then 60% in this, right? But this is fantastic. I mean, in terms of the learning curve, it resonates well. In terms of the discussion between this. Taking this further, so you talked about team building and drawing from your lessons and experiences around that. We talk, particularly in the last few years, we have seen this post-pandemic and, post-Brexit impact, and with the world going into the recessionary impact and all that sort of stuff. I mean, in business arena particularly, we are more, there's more tendency of uncertainty moving in. There's more tendency of volatility coming in, right? So in terms of business and resilience, how do you think businesses can deal with uncertain events, and how can businesses be more resilient? Right? So,
and it's something I talk about in the last year because when I go and speak at events, that's one of the questions I get asked. And what makes people feel uncomfortable, whether it's in society or in businesses, is uncertainty.
Yeah.
Because do we know what we're doing? What's happening? Are we going to be still going next year? Am I staying my job? What's going on? So if they feel uncertain, they sometimes withdraw and become more risk averse and or do things they probably wouldn't normally do, etc. So one of the things that leaders, for me personally, I think you need to do is you need to be that North Star. You need to very clearly articulate your direction. It doesn't have to be 100% correct, but at least you give some people the direction they want to go. It gives them some level of certainty that they can hang their hat on. So that's where you want us to go. Okay, right, I'll grab onto that because at least it gives me some certainty. And like anything else, sometimes it may not be the 100% correct decision, but at least you made a decision and you've given a direction and people follow it. That'll be much more successful than if you don't have a direction and people wander off and do their own thing. So for me, it's very much about how do you create that element of certainty, and that's one of the traits of a leader, is trying to create some sort of direction for, whether it's you're at the front of people or whether the people are following you. It's one of those interesting sort of discussions. But fundamentally, it's how do you give people a sense that there is certainty, and from a leadership point of view, they want that certainty, and part of that is confidence in you. So if they don't have a direction and they're not sure, don't think you're very confident about that, and you're not sure where you're going, that just adds to their uncertainty, that adds to the psychological sort of uncertainty they have about the situation. So whatever it is you need to do, and that's just a small, there's many things you can do. What is it you can do to create that certainty to allow people? Now that's sort of in the here and now. One of the things that's frustrated me for a long time is that, okay, then how do you prepare for resilience? Because I can't go, well, here's a resilience pill, take this, and you just take it and that's it, I've become resilient. You've got to understand the whole context of what creates a situation where you need to be resilient. What's the whole context of it? And understand it's obviously, people talk about bounce back ability, the ability to get up again and get back on the horse, or get up and wait for the next
bounce
challenge.
Back,
And so one of the challenges is the more that you can understand the various situations that may potentially present themselves, so scenario planning, look at what if scenarios, so if this happens or that happens, what would we do? And obviously just general skill set training, amongst other things, but those really tangible, practical things you can do, which enable you to be in a position where if something goes wrong, you are in a position to better be ready to overcome it. So from us, if you take sport and you take the military, the military, one of the reasons why we have so many SOPs and people think is because we're trying to simplify it as much as possible, so that if anything happens, we know exactly what's going to we need to refer to. So what the process is or procedure or checklist or whatever.
So quite the opposite. SOPs, I mean, people generally consider it's more to complicate things rather than to simplify them.
Well, obviously it
Be it
depends on
COVID protocols or otherwise
It's-
inside the
well,
organization. Yeah.
yeah, one person's complication is one person's simplicity and logic. So
Beautiful.
it's
Well said,
it's still fundamentally the whole context of it being the S is the most important part of that. All you're trying to do is create a standard. So we have a very simple scenario where when we're flying with another aircraft and we suddenly get in a situation where we've lost sight of each other and we go, knock it off, which is the sort of phrase for, right, stop the exercise, and you can't see the other person, we'd always revert to odds and evens. So
odds and evens.
odds and evens. So when you're at a flight level, you'd always, one of you would fly to odds and one would fly to even. So you separate. And that's a very simple SOP. So that just gets you, so you got 1,000 feet separation straight away. So little things like that is ingrained in us. But whenever we brief, we're constantly looking at the map and what we're trying to do. If we're trying to do this and trying to do, what happens if the weather's not be good here, because there's a bit hilly around here. The weather's today, there's rain, showers or whatever. This is a bit of a tight spot. How do we do this? We're constantly exploring the map to plan, but also looking at what if scenarios if certain things go on. And standard operating procedures are such that half the stuff that may go wrong are stuff that we know about, and it's happened before. So that's been made into SOP. So what's the standard? If somebody loses a radio, well, we have an SOP for that. So we collate, and there's an RV here, and we collate around there and stuff. Okay, as youngsters coming through flying training and coming through the squadron, some of the older sages would start briefing and say, okay, so, right, Mansoor, what's going to happen if one of your colleagues in the other aircraft has a problem? They have lost one of their engines. What are you going to do? And you so they're constantly asking you questions, challenging your mind to think about what would you do if this happened, this scenario. So they're obviously passing on their knowledge. And that's part of it. And in a sporting sense, you're constantly looking at what happens if this happens, what happens, how do you look after each other? And obviously, playing at sport, it's also something that when you play at a certain level, like I did, you're playing in front of 70,000 people. So if you make a mistake, 70,000 people will see it, and then obviously millions of people see it on TV. And I've been in that situation. Any of us who played sport will have done something that would have made a mistake. We dropped the ball, knocked it on, missed a tackle, dropped a high kick, sliced the kick, dropped the ball, whatever. We've all made those mistakes. And some of them have no impact on the end result. Some have a result, an impact on the result of the game. And depending on that happens, depends on how you feel that it went wrong. So I've been in a situation where something's happened and they scored a try and we lost the game. And there was a crowd full of people watching and millions of people watching on TV. So, you go through that cycle of, I can't believe I did that. Oh, you stupid idiot, And I wouldn't say it's the grief cycle, but there's an element of it that's going on through your mind. And of course, you rely on your close friends and family, especially the other half, and your colleagues. That sort of, and it's one of the strange black humours about playing sport. I remember the week after that incident, we were having our meeting the following week before we played another game the next week, and we watched the highlights of the game or lowlights, depending which you look at it. And when the incident happened, they all basically took the mickey out of me. So they were slagging me off. So to me, that's interesting. It's one of those reverse psychology sort of things where, if they were quiet and they didn't say anything, then you knew they were not happy and whatever. But the fact that we're taking the mickey out of it was like, I was still part of the team and they still, they felt my pain, etc. And it's that whole aspect of having a social sort of support structure that helps, which I think is just, in life anyway. So all those sort of things, there are ways of preparing yourself for resilience. And I think one of the problems that businesses have is during the good times, they'll go away and have symposiums and conferences in nice sunny places and go to do lots of matches and films and shows and whatever, and don't spend enough time investing in your people and training them up and making them much more aware of the experience, the situations and knowledge to make them be more resilient should the occasion happen.
Lovely. That is so interesting, Rory. And personally, I like this, the way you connected the concept of resilience from the background of sports as well as from a military background. Certainly, that's a new angle to look at it, particularly for me, who is more concentrated on the business landscape alone, and then taking.
Well, I mean, you say I've been involved for 25 years. So I've been running
So-
two businesses. I've been involved in two businesses since I left the military. And we've had some good times. We've had some tough times. Most people in the last 3 years have had some really tough times, not only during the pandemic lockdown, but also the last 6 months.
I want to touch upon those good times and bad times. But before that, I missed this point. You talk about a philosophy called lift, right? For our audience, I mean, what is the philosophy, and how can it be applied on businesses?
I tell you, I'm proud I feel that you call it a philosophy. So it's interesting. So one of the challenges I had in coming out of the military, I said to you before, was this what and how. And part of it was understanding how to be able to articulate it in a way that people in business understood, and that I could make it into, obviously, some intellectual property that I could sell, and that was my proposition. Otherwise, I'm just another person who happens to have a very nice, experience and background from playing sport and military. That is just another team builder and or lecturer or keynote speaker and or consultant or whatever. So how do I differentiate my whole proposition? And the what and the how has always stuck with me. It's always been something that's very important to me. And one of the challenges people always goes, well, how do you measure that? And so to measure how you get the people working together to be able to deliver is always a difficult one. It's always where's my ROI, which comes back to the what.
Right.
And so it's always very difficult to measure, And so one of the challenges I get myself, or at least the conundrum I was always constantly thinking about, was how do I encapsulate my sort of thinking and concept from my previous background into a business background that encapsulates the what you're trying to do, whether it's military, sport, and in this case business, as well as how that people as individuals, teams and organizations does it together, so you can encompass that on one model, and also create something that at least can have some sort of measurement involved to it. So that was my challenge. Lift, where lift comes from, so that's the lead into it. So lift was obviously from my flying background. That's where that comes from. It's more of a metaphor. And so if we take flying, so I did ask you. I mean, you've talked about this before. You're not a pilot, are you, Mansoor?
No.
Okay. Well, when I speak to people and ask them, if I ask the question to anybody who run a business and say, do you sometimes find when you're trying to do your business, you're trying to do your work, when you're trying to operate as a team or teams and organizations, do you sometimes find they just feel like there's just drag in there? And I guarantee you, people will, I guarantee virtually 99.9%, I'll have to say 100, 99.9% of people are going, yeah. I don't have to explain anything to do about lift or aerodynamics. They'll understand that, okay? So what the idea came to me was that, obviously from my background as a pilot, I understand the basics of aerodynamics. And the context of aerodynamics, there's 4 forces that act on an aircraft, okay, for make it fly. So when you've got an aircraft sitting on the ground, it's got a mass, so it weighs something on the ground. You've obviously got an engine, so if you put the throttle up, you get a bit of thrust out the back. So you've got mass, you've got thrust. Once you start increasing the thrust, it starts overcoming the friction of the tyre and the weight of the aircraft on the ground, so the mass, starts moving it, okay? It overcomes the drag of the actual aircraft going through the air, and when there's enough speed to create enough lift on the wings, it gets airborne.
I see.
So there's the mass of the aircraft against the thrust, against the drag, against the lift.
The 4 forces.
The 4 forces.
Back to physics class, huh?
Yes, no, well, there you go, see? So you're halfway to becoming a pilot now. So when I reflected on that, and I thought about those 4 forces about an aircraft, I sort of related it to a business. You think about a business, when you think about lift, you think about growth. That was a sort of link that I had in that whole context. So as a business, we all want to grow. We want to get bigger and make more money and grow again and invest and get more people, etc. And so when I thought about it, you think about the mass of an aircraft. Well, the mass for an aircraft is like the size of an organization, the size of a company, whatever. So more and more people. So as you grow, the size increases. So you get more and more people. The more and more people you get in that, it creates more complexity. As you have more people talking to each other, it just creates complexity. Any sort of, you have 2 people, it's complex enough. add a third person, it increases it fourth, and then into tens and hundreds. So complexity, to me, that is the drag. So that complexity, if not overcome, just creates drag. So sorry, we've got mass, you've got drag. Now for me, the more people have in a business, the more people that are talking to each other, the greater that they understand the commercial aspect of your business, what you're trying to do, then that overcomes the size. Now with all the complexity that goes on, so the more people you have, the more processes, the more systems, the different locations, to overcome that, you need to have the sort of cultural team working. If that gets right, that tends to help overcoming the drag. So if you take the drag and the mass, I put those together as drag, just generally, just keep it as a simple connotation. And then for that lift, which is commercial awareness, so the what you're trying to do. So commercially, are people aware? Because the number of businesses I go into where they know what their job is, but they don't really know, they sort of know what the title is, but they know what they do. I don't know what that department does. The number of businesses I go into where people don't exactly know what each other does. So that commercial awareness is obviously going to be low. And their understanding of what each other does and how it impacts on the business and strategy.
Fantastic.
And then the whole cultural thing about teamwork, as I said before, the how is just let's go to the pub and get a few drinks. It always stemmed from, why is it that we as humans and businesses and teams or whatever just assume that if there's a problem, a situation, a scenario, a project, initiative, whatever, let's just throw 6 people at it and they will automatically work as a team. It doesn't automatically happen. You've got to work at it. To be the best rugby team in the world, you've got to work at being part as a team, of how you work together and what you've got to do. All that takes effort.
Lovely.
And so that cultural awareness is part of it. So that's the lift. And so you change the aircraft for a business, and the same thing applies. So you've got drag, and there is just drag. You have all these sort of things. Do you understand what your drag is? Do you know what's creating that drag? So therefore, how do you overcome that drag? And then from that point of view, the more you can overcome drag, you obviously make it easier for you to create lift, but also if you can identify anything that creates more lift, then that makes life easier.
Lovely.
I mean, from a flying perspective, designers are trying to design aircraft to be as efficient as possible, not only in the way they fly through the air, but also with the engines. So they're constantly looking for efficiency. They're trying to reduce drag and create more lift, if not energy. So that's the lift concept.
Well explained. Let us know when you want to patent this, right? So we'll help you in the business school with commercialization and stuff.
Okay,
done. I know it's already done, but beautiful. One last thing is, this is fantastic conversation. I wish we could take this further on different tangents and talk about other areas, which we'll be doing in other episodes and hopefully other seasons. One last message: how do you deal with disappointments, downturns? How do you convert those roadblocks into milestones? If you look at the journey, on the playing field as well as flying in air when you're airborne, I'm sure there must have been mishaps, must have been errors, there must have been things not going your way. So how do you deal with that? Those
There's 2 things I always think about. One is those things will happen.
Okay. So
if you are trying to achieve something, create something, do something, be the best you can be, mistakes, mishaps, scenarios that go against you, fastballs, whatever you want to call them, they will come.
So to recognize them first?
Well, not even understand? Just acknowledge at some point they will come.
Okay.
People just assume I'm invulnerable, nothing will happen to me, I'll just go. And when it hits them, it's like, oh my God, what do I do now? So the first thing is, accept that it will happen. You will make a mistake. You will do things wrong. You will do something you regret. You will have something fastball. Somebody will come and throw a fastball at you. This will happen. Your client will decide to change their contract and go somewhere else.
Last minute.
Whatever it is, something will happen. It's very, very, I can't, if you speak to anybody in the world, they'll always tell you that something that didn't go the way they planned it to. So that's the first thing. If you accept that, then you are in the realms of accepting that something may go wrong. So if it does, you are half ready for it. Okay, so that's a psychological aspect. The second thing is, if it does happen and you know it's going to happen, the point is, what do you do with that? What do you do with that learning? And so the other tenet I use, and I try to live by it, is the only mistake you'll ever make is one you never learn from. So everything that goes wrong, whether it's a mistake or a fastball or whatever, learn from it. Because if you don't, you've wasted an opportunity.
Lovely, right? You heard that from the man himself, right? So acceptance and then learning from that. I mean, I recall exactly what you said, that you don't lose until unless you lose the lesson in the process, right? So that's fantastic. Thank you for taking your time,
Pleasure.
Rory.
Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, that was Rory Underwood. Thank you so much.